You've been lied to about relationships your entire life, and it's destroying your chances with women. Before you even start playing the game, while you're bringing flowers and opening doors like some pathetic servant, she's calculating whether you're strong enough to be worth her time or just another weak man she can manipulate and discard. Thomas Hobbes understood something about human nature that modern society desperately wants to hide. From you, every relationship is fundamentally a war for resources, respect, and reproductive advantage where only the strongest survive. What I'm about to reveal will shatter every romantic delusion you've been fed and replace them with the brutal strategies that actually work when dealing with female nature. But most men are too weak to handle these truths about the woman sitting across from them. Thomas Hobbes described the state of nature as a condition where life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. This perfectly describes modern dating before you understand the rules of engagement. Every swipe, every conversation, every date is fundamentally a competition for scarce resources, her attention, her commitment, her respect. She enters every interaction calculating what you can provide versus what she might have to give up. This isn't cruelty, it's survival instinct hardwired into human nature. The moment you stop seeing dating as a pleasant social activity and start recognizing it as strategic warfare, everything changes. She's not your friend hoping you'll succeed. She's an opponent testing your worthiness through a series of challenges, disguised as casual interactions. When she's late for your date, when she mentions other guys, when she tests your boundaries, these aren't accidents or innocent behaviors. They are calculated moves designed to measure your strength, your frame, your ability to maintain control under pressure. Most men lose this war before it even begins because they refuse to acknowledge they're fighting. They bring flowers to a battlefield and wonder why they get destroyed. They offer vulnerability when she's probing for dominance markers. Hobbes understood that in the absence of a clear power structure, chaos reigns supreme. Your dating life is chaos until you accept that every woman you meet is fundamentally your competitor for resources, status, and genetic advantage. Only then can you begin to play the game with the strategic mindset required to win. Hobbes famously declared that in the state of nature, there exists a war of all against all. This is exactly what happens in the sexual marketplace, where every woman is competing for access to the highest value men. She's not just choosing you, she's actively rejecting dozens of other options while keeping backup plans ready. This isn't personal betrayal. It's biological programming designed for species survival through hypergamous selection. Every woman operates under the assumption that she deserves better than what she currently has. This creates a perpetual state of relationship warfare where you're constantly defending your position. She will test your value against other men through social media validation, workplace flirtations, and strategic mentions of male attention she receives. These aren't innocent behaviors. They're tactical maneuvers designed to gauge whether you're still her best available option. The modern dating app culture has weaponized this natural hypergamous instinct into a digital battleground where she holds all the initial power. She swipes through hundreds of potential mates, while you compete desperately for her fleeting attention. Understanding this dynamic is crucial for survival. You must accept that she views relationships as temporary arrangements until something better comes along. This knowledge transforms you from a hopeful romantic into a strategic competitor who plays the game with clear eyes and realistic expectations. Hobbes argued that people willingly surrender their freedoms to a sovereign authority in exchange for protection and order. Women instinctively seek this same dynamic in relationships, but will never admit it openly. She craves a man who can establish clear boundaries, make decisive decisions, and create a stable framework where she feels secure enough to surrender. Control. This isn't about domination. It's about providing the leadership structure that allows her feminine nature to flourish without chaos. The social contract in your relationship means she gives you her loyalty, respect, and cooperation in exchange for your strength, direction, and protection from life's uncertainties. Most men fail because they try to negotiate this contract as equals. They ask for her permission, seek her approval for decisions, and treat the relationship like a democracy. This creates anxiety in her because nature designed her to follow strong leadership, not to provide it herself when you refuse to step up. When you establish yourself as the sovereign in your relationship, you're not taking something from her. You're giving her what she desperately needs but cannot request directly. She will test this authority constantly through emotional outbursts, boundary pushing, and challenges to your decisions. These tests aren't meant to overthrow you but to confirm that you're strong enough to maintain order. The moment you abdicate your role as sovereign and start seeking her approval for leadership decisions, the social contract breaks down and chaos returns to destroy what you've built together. Hobbes. Leviathan represents the absolute authority needed to prevent societal collapse. In relationships, you must become this commanding presence that maintains order through decisive action and unwavering frame. She will naturally challenge your authority to test whether you possess the strength to lead or if you'll crumble under pressure like most men do. Your response to these challenges determines whether you establish yourself as the Leviathan or become another weak man she loses respect for. The Leviathan principle requires you to make decisions without seeking her approval or validation. She needs to see that you operate from an internal authority that cannot be shaken by her emotional storms or manipulative tactics. When she creates drama, throws tantrums, or threatens to leave, these are tests of your sovereignty that demand calm, measured responses rather than desperate attempts to appease her. The moment you start negotiating with her emotions or changing your decisions based on her reactions, you've abdicated your role as the relationship's governing authority. True power in relationships comes from your willingness to walk away rather than compromise your core principles. This creates the respect and attraction that keeps her invested in maintaining the relationship. Most men fear exercising this authority because they've been conditioned to believe that leadership equals abuse, but Hobbes understood that without clear hierarchical structure, relationships descend into chaos where both parties suffer. Your job is to establish and maintain this structure through consistent strength, not through aggression or cruelty, but through unshakable confidence in your right to lead. Hobbes identified fear as the primary motivator that keeps people in line with social contracts in relationships. She must fear losing you more than you fear losing her for the dynamic to work properly. This doesn't mean terrorizing her with threats or abuse. It means cultivating the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have options and aren't desperate for her validation. When she realizes you're not dependent on her approval for your self-worth, she begins to respect the strength that most men never develop. The fear that creates respect is her understanding that you will enforce your boundaries regardless of her emotional reactions. She needs to know that crossing your lines has real consequences that you're willing to implement. Most men are so terrified of conflict or abandonment that they let her walk all over their stated boundaries. This teaches her that your words mean nothing and that she can manipulate you through tantrums and threats. True strength means being more afraid of losing your self-respect than losing her presence in your life. Society has convinced men that being nice and accommodating will earn them love and loyalty. But Hobbes understood that fear of consequences creates order while niceness creates contempt. She doesn't need another friend who agrees with everything she says. She needs a man strong enough to stand firm when she's wrong and confident enough to risk her displeasure to maintain his principles. The fear of losing someone who actually has standards becomes the foundation of genuine respect that transforms her from an adversary into a willing partner. Hobbes stripped away comforting illusions to reveal harsh truths about human nature. Modern romance is built on similarly deceptive fantasies that keep men trapped in losing strategies. Society sells you the lie that relationships are about finding your soulmate, sharing deep emotional connections, and living happily ever after. These romantic notions serve female interests by making you ignore the transactional nature of all human relationships. She benefits when you believe in unconditional love because it makes you give without demanding equal return. The pretty lie of romance convinces you that she loves you for who you are, rather than what you provide. This delusion prevents you from recognizing that her affection is directly tied to your value as a mate. When your status drops, your income decreases, or your physical attractiveness declines, watch how quickly her romantic feelings evaporate. This isn't a character flaw, but biological programming designed to secure the best possible resources for offspring survival. Romance is the marketing campaign that disguises this brutal calculus. Hollywood movies and pop culture perpetuate these romantic myths because they serve the feminine imperative. By keeping men in provider mode without demanding reciprocal investment, the moment you see through the illusion and recognize relationships as strategic partnerships, based on mutual benefit rather than mystical connections, you gain the clarity needed to negotiate from strength. Hobbes taught us that acknowledging uncomfortable truths about human nature is the first step toward creating workable systems. The same principle applies to understanding the real dynamics that govern successful relationships. Hobbes identified self-preservation as the fundamental human drive that supersedes all other considerations in relationships. Putting her needs before your own is a violation of natural law that inevitably leads to your destruction. She instinctively prioritizes her own survival and advancement while expecting you to sacrifice yourself for her benefit. This creates an imbalanced dynamic where you're constantly giving while she's constantly taking. The moment you accept this arrangement, you've signed your own death warrant as an attractive man. Self-preservation means protecting your time, energy, resources, and emotional well-being from her endless demands for attention and validation. She will test your commitment to yourself through guilt trips, emotional manipulation, and threats of abandonment. Most men fail this test because they've been programmed to believe that good relationships require selfless sacrifice. But Hobbes understood that systems built on one-sided sacrifice inevitably collapse. When the giver becomes depleted and resentful, your primary responsibility is ensuring your own survival and advancement before considering her needs. This isn't selfish but strategically necessary for maintaining the strength she actually desires in a partner. When you consistently put yourself first, you develop the confidence and abundance mentality that makes you genuinely attractive rather than desperately needy. She will respect a man who values himself enough to enforce his boundaries more than a man who abandons his own interests to serve hers. Self-preservation creates the scarcity that transforms you from a disposable resource into a prize worth competing for. Hobbes understood that all human interactions involve negotiation for limited resources. Every conversation with her is fundamentally about establishing who controls the frame, who gets their needs met, and who holds the power in your relationship dynamic. She enters each discussion with her own agenda while testing your ability to maintain your position under pressure. Recognizing this transforms you from a naive participant into a strategic negotiator who understands the stakes involved in seemingly casual exchanges. When she brings up relationship issues, complains about your behavior, or makes demands for changes, she's not seeking understanding or compromise. She's attempting to shift the power balance in her favor through emotional leverage. Your response determines whether you maintain your authority or surrender control to her manipulation tactics. Most men lose these negotiations because they try to logic their way through emotional battlefields instead of recognizing the strategic nature of her approach. Effective negotiation requires you to remain emotionally detached while she escalates her tactics. Never defend, explain, or justify your positions, because these responses signal weakness and invite further attacks on your frame. Instead, acknowledge her concerns without accepting responsibility for her emotional states and redirect conversations toward solutions that benefit you both. This demonstrates strength while refusing to be manipulated by her feelings. The goal isn't to win every argument, but to establish yourself as someone who cannot be moved by emotional pressure. This creates the respect necessary for productive negotiations where both parties understand their roles and limitations. Hobbes believed that without clear hierarchical structure, society descends into chaos where everyone suffers. Relationships operate under the same principle and require you to establish a functional hierarchy that creates stability for both parties. She needs to understand her role, your expectations, and the consequences of crossing established boundaries. This isn't about oppression but about creating the predictable structure that allows both of you to thrive within defined parameters. The hierarchy you create must be based on competence and responsibility rather than arbitrary dominance. You Lead because you make better decisions, handle pressure more effectively, and take responsibility for the relationship's direction and outcomes. She follows because she recognizes your superior judgment in areas where leadership is required. This natural division of roles eliminates the constant power struggles that destroy relationships built on false equality premises. Maintaining this hierarchy requires consistent enforcement of your standards without explanation or negotiation. The moment you start justifying your leadership decisions or seeking her approval for boundary enforcement, the structure begins to collapse. She will test this hierarchy regularly through challenges to your authority. But these tests are designed to confirm your strength rather than overthrow your position. Passing these tests reinforces the order that makes her feel secure and allows her feminine nature to flourish. The chaos that results from failed leadership hurts both parties, while proper hierarchy creates the stability where genuine partnership can develop. Within clearly defined roles, Hobbes recognized that true sovereignty comes with the heavy responsibility of making difficult decisions that others cannot or will not make. As the leader in your relationship, you must be willing to choose the hard path when it serves the greater good of your partnership. She will often resist decisions that benefit the relationship long-term if they cause her short-term discomfort. Your job is to maintain perspective and make choices based on strategic necessity, rather than immediate emotional comfort. The sovereign's burden means accepting that you will sometimes be the villain in her story when you enforce boundaries, refuse unreasonable demands, or prioritize long-term stability over momentary happiness. This is the price of leadership that weak men refuse to pay. When you make the hard decision to end toxic patterns, demand respect, or walk away from destructive behavior, she may react with anger and accusations. But these reactions confirm that you're doing what's necessary rather than what's easy or popular. Leading requires the emotional strength to withstand her tests, manipulation attempts, and efforts to make you feel guilty for maintaining standards. Most men crumble under this pressure and abandon their leadership role to avoid conflict. But Hobbes understood that abdication of authority creates more suffering than firm leadership ever could when you consistently make the hard decisions that protect your relationship's foundation. You create the security and respect that transforms conflict into cooperation. The burden of leadership is heavy, but the alternative is the chaos that destroys everything you've worked to build together. Thomas Hobbes revealed the uncomfortable truth that human relationships are fundamentally about power, survival, and strategic advantage rather than the romantic fantasies society sells you. Every interaction with her is a test of your strength, your frame, and your willingness to maintain the hierarchical structure that creates order from chaos. The moment you abandon your role as sovereign, you invite the destruction of everything you've built. Are you ready to stop being the nice guy who finishes last and start being the strategic leader who commands genuine respect? Or will you continue believing the pretty lies that keep you trapped in losing battles? Subscribe to this channel if you're ready to learn the hard truths that transform boys into men who actually win in the game of relationships.